Page number 123 continued. Munnu arose with a sudden jerk and, unmindful of the hurt he had received, bolted to get under the cover of the sacks on which he had slept last night so that he could go to another shop for a job later. But the merchant was still abusing him and had drawn the attention of the other businessmen who were opening their shops and performing purification ceremonies by sprinkling holy water over their cash boxes. They took up the cue for abuse from their brother merchant. "Run away, you little wretch, you lover of your mother, run away," they shouted loudly, mechanically, without any grievance, and they worked up a scare all around the market as if Munnu was a thief or a brigand to be chased off. Munnu made for the passage opening out of the square as if he carried his life on the palm of his hand. End of page number 123. Now page number 124. After he had run for 100 yards or so, he slowed down. There was a throbbing in his head and streams of perspiration were running down his face. He brushed his cheeks, leaving a trail of flushed hot blood. A cool draught was blowing through the aperture of the gully at the confluence of the two bazaars. He stopped under the shadow cast by a tall house to feel the breeze and to recollect himself. He thought of Tulsi carrying weights of grain. Lucky Tulsi, he will earn 4 annas today and I shall have nothing to take home to Prabha. And it was all my idea. If I hadn't told Tulsi to wait when the coolies had been pushed back by the Lala, he would not have got the job. I wish I had been strong enough to bear the sack of grain. He was angry with himself and impatient. Oh, he rebuked himself. When will I grow up and be a strong man? Then he became conscious of the hurried glances of the passers-by. One man who had come to the passageway leading into the market and sat down to make water by the gutter stared at him. I must go, he said to himself. Go home. But I can't go home without having earned any money. The stabbing thought came, and he stood torn for a moment, his heart beating, his head still throbbing faintly, and the heat in his body swelling in the veins of his legs. Then a snack-laden cart came by, pulled by a sleepy-eyed black buffalo and 2 men who flogged the animal ruthlessly as they strained to steer the shafts of the vehicle by a thick wooden handle. Munnu had to move on, because there was hardly any room for a big uncouth carriage to pass. For a while he walked emptily, hardly aware of anything. Then he suddenly stopped and asked himself where he was going. To the vegetable market, where the old coolie said, I could lift small weights. The answer came to him like a ray of light in the darkness. He moved on. Why do I suddenly die like that? He kept asking himself the rest of the way. What happens to me that I can't think or see or feel sometimes, while my body goes on moving, and then suddenly I can recognize and hear everything? Do I die or what? Get burnt up into a speck of ash and then evaporate into complete emptiness? How is it that I go on breathing? What is that separate thing under my skin which exists apart from the things in my head? And where do the globules of light come from, tinted on the side, which swarm before my eyes and wave like a sunlight in the Master Prabha's? End of page 124. Now page 125. Factory with the stole through the chinks in the iron sheets in summer. But the problem seemed insoluble. Only the hammer of his brain struck more rapidly, and the heat of his body grew, and the minute images in the corners of his soul broke up into even more microscopic elements, until they sank into the complete emptiness from which they had emerged. Then the concrete shapes of men jostling in the street The articles in shops and the forms of tall houses, small houses, and light cavernous gullies filled his eyes. "Where is the vegetable market, brother?" He pulled up a coolie and asked. The man stared at him dazed, completely taken aback. Then he said, "Second turning on the right by the Chowk Farid." Munnu ran away without even looking at the man or expressing his gratitude. The desire to earn money possessed him like a panic. The vegetable market was a bazaar rather than a square, and richer in color and life, as business here began earlier in the day, so that the fruit and flower might be sold before the heat of the sun tarnished their beauty. It was a riot of color and variety, and all the multi-hued and heterogeneous greens which grew in the tropical gardens of Hindustan were there. Green chilies, green cucumbers, green spinach, pale lady fingers, purple brinjals, red tomatoes, white turnips, grey artichokes, yellow carrots, golden melons, rose-cheeked mangoes, copper-colored bananas, all arranged in little baskets which sloped up from the foot of each shop to its ceiling on both sides of the street. And in the street were the endless streams of ill-clad servant boys, ragged men, black-skinned old widows who bargained for a commission, and rich bourgeois women in many-colored silk shirts and tinted aprons, chaperoning their daughters or daughters-in-law, loaded with gold-embroidered silks and garlands of jewels, haggling with the wild-eyed shopkeepers over the price of potatoes. Amid the clamour of the tongues, the challenge of sights, and the symphony of smells, Munnu did not know which way to turn. He stared at the piles of fruit which glowed from the beds of the green leaves. He nosed towards the baskets in which the more delicate fruits were arranged. A contingent of ripe, luscious, small mangoes attracted him, and his mouth watered. "Oi, you seducer of your daughter," called a shopkeeper from the side. "Will you lift a weight for 2 farthings? End of page 125. Now page 126. "Yes, Lalaji," shouted a chorus of 5 voices. But Munnu had got hold of the basket in the shopkeeper's hand. It was as easy as that, but only for 2 pice. "Oh God, that bread should be so dear and flesh and blood so cheap," Munnu recited the proverb as he pushed his rivals aside. Munnu turned to the vegetable market dawn after dawn, while Tulsi repaired to the grain market. Their total earnings were never more than 8 annas a day, of which the ratio was Tulsi's 6 to Munnu's 2. Poor enough wage, but it needed all their pluck and a bit of luck to get it, for there were swarms of coolies about, and urged by the fear of having to go without food, driven by the fear of hunger gnawing in their bellies, they rushed frantically at the shops, pushing, pulling, struggling to shove each other out of the way, till the merchants' staves had knocked a hillman's teeth out, or bled the sores on a Kashmiri's head. Then they would fall back, defeated, afraid for their lives, and resigned to the workings of fate, which might single them out for the coveted price of an anna job. It was not that the strongest of them was chosen and the weaker had to go to the wall. The caprice of any merchant boy decided their lot, or the shrewdness of the Lala, who could make them accept less wages for more work. Sometimes perhaps a subtle trick could secure a coolie a job. Certainly it was cunning which secured Munnu most of the work he got. Knowing that there was a great deal of competition in the vegetable market, he would roam into the side streets, putting on an innocent expression, greet any ladies who seemed to be heading for the vegetable market. "Mother, will you let me carry your shopping home?" All right, the woman would say. You can carry the burden if you will do it for a pice. Oh, 2 pice, mother, 2 pice, please, he insisted, pronouncing the word mother with the deliberate tenderness that he had specially cultivated for the purpose. All right, may you die, the woman replied, and he would wrest the basket out of her hand, carrying it as an insignia of his established right, so that none of the other coolies would dare to approach the lady. End of page number 126. Now page 127. When the other coolies began to practice the same trick, he had perforce to think of another. He tried to curry favor with the shopkeepers, but they were too concerned with their business and too selfish to appreciate his courtesies, especially as all the coolies were to them a nuisance, rude, uncouth, dirty people to be rebuked, abused or beaten, like the donkeys which brought the weights of vegetables to the market every morning. He sought to trick the other coolies by spreading the rumor that the market was to be closed the next day. This worked 2 or 3 times, but most of the coolies hung around the market all day and all night, eating, drinking, sleeping and working there. And those who were gullible soon found out that Munnu was a mischievous imp, never to be trusted. He had to fall back upon the original scheme of booking jobs with women, though he slightly varied the method of getting them now. He did not go out on the market, but while the other coolies sat admiring the beautiful young woman who passed through the bazaar, he kept a lookout for the oldest, the ugliest and most eccentric hags. The only disadvantage of this was that the old ladies bargained vociferously, vociferously for hours to save a pice, spent ages superstitiously counting each half pice, and generally wanted to requite Munnu for patiently following them from shop to shop with a loaded basket half the day, and for walking 2 miles behind them to their houses in the gullies with a loaf of stale bread and yesterday's lentils, or haggled with him about the 2 pice they had promised to pay. So all his efforts and all Tulsi's did not earn them more than 8 annas a day, and this money could not feed the whole family or anything but lentils and rice. Meanwhile, though Prabha had recovered from the fever and the bruises, he had a relapse and lay still with nervous breakdown, brought about by the pain of seeing the stock in his factory auctioned away, and by the anxiety of the resolve that he had formed to pay every farthing that he owed to his creditors. He worried too on account of the boys, knowing from his own past experience as a coolie in the markets how hard it was to earn even a pice a day. His condition became worse and worse until the doctor advised him to go away to the hills if he wanted to save his life. At last he was persuaded to go home with his wife. Tulsi was to end of page 127. Now page 128. See them off to Pathankot, to put them in a cart there and come back. Munnu was to stay in Daulatpur, as they had not enough money to buy railway tickets for all of them, but she was to join the master and mistress later on in the hills. It was an awful parting. Both Prabha and his wife wept bitterly. Munnu had never seen a man of Prabha's age and size cry. That wretched face, which had always smiled so gently and good-naturedly at him, and which was now hollow and dark with sickness and misery, looked ridiculous in his plight. The boy shirked coming near his master, as if he had lost all the sympathy of his nature. He looked on mechanically from a distance, asking himself in brief whispers, "What is the matter with me? Why can't I go near him? He has been so kind to me." With his mistress, however, he was more affectionate. He fell into her lap as she sat in the window after everything had been packed and bathed in her tears, felt the shy bird of his heart fluttering in a sad, silken darkness. The memory of the day when he had arrived here came back to him in vivid flashes of lightning, illuminating the gentle face of this woman, defining the evasive, tender smile with which she had made him feel at home. And then he recalled the pressure of her limbs against him when he was ill. The echo was full of warmth similar to that which he felt now, only somehow he did not want to give himself to that warmth as he had done during his helplessness. He withdrew from her grasp with a sudden self-consciousness and stood torn and miserable while she wept. Tulsi came with the message that he had engaged a bamboo cart which stood waiting at the head of the lane to carry them to the station. 2 coolies followed him, Tulsi's friends from the grain market, who had, with the natural brotherliness, offered to help with the luggage. There was not much luggage, only a trunk and bedding. As Prabha rose, leaning on Tulsi and Munnu's shoulders, he surveyed the desolate room which he had inhabited in the heyday of his prosperity. Then he looked at the single trunk and the bedding being lifted by the coolies and recalled that those were the only things with which he had entered the house when he first came, and how he was going out of the Daulatpur with just these 2 things. Also the surplus goods that he had acquired during the interim were superfluous. End of page 128. Now page 129. It is good, he said to himself, bending his pale face weakly, philosophically. It is as it should be. Man comes to this world naked and goes out of it naked, and he doesn't carry his goods away with him on his chest. It is best to travel light. The pale afternoon sun that came in through the iron bars of the window made his home look like a mine of pure gold, giving it a sort of fairy world enchantment. But he religiously turned his back on it and bent, weary, weak, worn out and crushed, he walked out supported by his 2 proteges. His wife followed with her apron modestly drawn over her grief and her good looks. The neighboring men and women had gathered in the courtyard to say farewell to the once most successful and now the most broken of all hill coolies. Ram Ram, brother Prabdayal, they consoled in sad, somber tones. Ram Ram, it will be all right. You will come back again. You will come back after you have regained your health and outlived my shame, the bankrupt shame. Prabha added with a sneer of mockery to torture himself. So completely had he accepted all business ideals, and so convinced was he of having violated the laws of society, so slavishly humble in spite of the hard knocks he had received. And then, with tears in his eyes and a breaking voice, he waxed philosophical, reciting the familiar Indian proverb, "A wise dog should have smelt the threshold and run away." The cavalcade passed through Catkiller's Lane under the amused and sympathetic gaze of men and women who had come to their doors to obtain yet another sensational topic for gossip. The bamboo cart driver cursed furiously when he found that his passengers were not rich lalas but a pack of coolies, and under the pretext of hurrying to catch the train, whereas he was really anxious to pick up better fare, he flayed his horse into a dangerous canter which made the high, closed structure jolt and sway as if it were a box of an funfair roundabout. Prabha was resigned, even though his heart was in his mouth with the violent knocking and with the hard impact of the springless seats. "Oh, go slowly, Sheikh Sahib," said Munnu flatteringly. "My master is ill. "I am not your father's servant," said the driver, "that I should wait about for you and miss the passengers in the Bombay mail." End of page 129. Now page 130. Munnu felt angry at this and wondered how a man could be so cruel as to a so good-natured a person as his master. He felt sadder at the station, sadder than ever. The train was on the platform as it started from Daulatpur junction, but the third-class passengers were kept penned up like cattle in the iron cage of the waiting room, barred with steel doors, which were only opened 5 minutes before the engine gave its whistle. As they all sat on the cement floor among hundreds of other passengers, among hundreds of bundles, among the buzzing of swarms of flies and armies of mosquitoes, they all secretly prayed to God to allow them a safe place in the train. Nothing short of a miracle would save Prabha's life in the blind rush of passengers to the platform out of this prison, Munnu divined. So he went off reconnoitering to see if there was a loophole through which they could escape to the train. A ticket collector with a white uniform adorned with nickel buttons was proudly walking about on the lookout for bribes. He spotted Munnu and read the anxiety in his eyes. "2 annas," he whispered, "and I will let you in through a side door." That was half the sum of Munnu's savings for some days. He slipped it into the Babu's hand. He felt afraid that the Babu might not keep his word after accepting the bribe, but the man was quite honest, except that he was poor and took bribes. He not only slipped them through a side door, but saw them safely into one of the few third-class compartments that were attached to the train. Munnu stood sadly looking on at his master and mistress and Tulsi, who were now seated in the train. He felt miserable and alone, as if he had already been cut off from them forever. "You go now, Munnu," said Prabha, dragging his wretched carcass out of the window and pressing a silver rupee into the boy's palm. "Buy yourself some food and sleep at home, for the rent is paid to the end of the month." "Jai Deva," said Munnu, joining his hands and overcome with gratitude and love for the man. "May you live, child," said Prabha, stroking his head. "I fall at your feet," Munnu said, turning his joined hands to his mistress. "May you live, child," she said, caressing his cheeks. End of page 130. Now page 131. "I will come back in 2 days. Oye Munnu, brother," said Tulsi. "Acha," said Munnu, and walked away embarrassedly. He fondled the silver rupee in his hand and felt elated. Then he was sad to realize how kind Prabha had been to him even in his misery. "He is surely a very religious man," he said to himself. "I wonder if he learned to be kind by his devotions at the temple. I too shall go to the temple this evening. They give free food at the shrine of Bhagat Hardas. I shall save money that way and also become religious." His cogitations, cogitations, were disturbed by the furious. His cogitations were disturbed by the furious stamping rush of the hordes of third-class passengers who had now been released from the waiting room and were already storming the train, because they believed that the train, being a moving thing, would move away and leave them behind if they did not run and catch it at once. He slipped out of the railings on the side by squeezing his supple body and came into the station yard, where the cart drivers were shouting and raving. "To Clock Tower and Vishnu Temple, to Lohari Gate, Delhi Bazaar, to the Hira Mandi, Guru's Dharmsala. Way, child, way. Child, will you lift this bag to Dr. Sahib Singh's bungalow at the hospital for me? I will give you 2 annas. There is some dutiable silk in it, and we will slip by the customs house if I am not riding in a carriage. It is only 200 yards away." Yes, mother, said Munnu eagerly and reflected. This is easy work. I shall come here again and lift bags for people rather than earn 2 paise for carrying vegetables in the market. Now he was alone and he had nothing else to do after he had taken the bag from the railway station to the hospital in the civil lines except to eat his evening meal. He knew he could get that free at the shrine of Bhagat Hardas. According to his design and also wishing to become religious, he repaired to the temple of Vishnu, where he had only been once before with Prabha on the day of his arrival. He entered it this time through the portals near the lofty houses of the rich merchants of the antique bazaar. The milk-white light of a full moon made the domed roof of the tall phallic temple blossom out like a full-grown lotus, and the cornice shone from the middle of the tank. A vast concourse of gaily dressed people were moving around it. End of page 131. Now page 132. Guided by the lamps that mocked at the silver moonshine, Munnu joined the throng and began to walk in the direction of the mausoleum of Bhagat Hardas. Page number 132. Direction of the mausoleum of Bhagat Hardas, whose polished marble shone out beyond the square of the tank from a background of mouldering travertine. He wanted food more than the blessing of the religion, and it was the hour when bread and lentils were distributed to the poor and holy at the kitchen of the shrine. It was this urge which had decided him not to buy flowers to offer at the temple. The vague desire to acquire holiness evaporated from his mind completely as he went along, noticing the vast shadows of the turreted and domed structure in the middle of the pond, playing with the reflection of the moon. The monumental structure inspired him with awe, as if the Spirit of God was torturing him with its magnificent, invisible presence. He began to walk hurriedly, his one desire being to get away from the oppressive spirit that brooded over the temple. The slow tortoise speed of the crowd of devotees was a hindrance, but Munnu had become a past master in the art of slipping by the irregular pedestrians of the city of Daulatpur. He passed through a tunnel leading into the yard of the shrine of Hardas. There was a stand there where a devout Brahmin was distributing free water in brass cups, nominally free, but really to be paid for, as Munnu found that all those who quenched their thirst threw a copper at the feet of the holy man, who had turned menial but had not lost the pride of his ancestral power. Munnu's throat was parched, and he lifted a cup to his mouth, but he did not throw a copper coin when he pushed the soiled cup away. The Brahmin scowled at him and muttered the proverb, "May the misers fade away." Munnu did not mind being cursed. He had long since got used to abuse and no longer believed in its magical effect. He bolted under cover of darkness to explore the possibilities of charity. He hoped people were not expected to pay for the free food too. "Food from the kitchen of God," shouted a man who held a pan by a string handle as he scurried to and fro, accompanied by an attendant with a basket. Munnu saw 2 young mendicants and paupers running towards him, leaving the old ascetics hobbling along behind and elbowing each other in their onrush. This surely was the dispenser of the free food. In a moment the crowd of beggars would be on the man. End of page 132. Now page 133. He ran and spread his hands before the dispenser of food. "Where is your plate?" the man asked. "I haven't got one, Maharaj," Munnu said, with a tremor in his lips to convey an appeal for pity. The attendant had, however, already thrown him 2 chapatis, and the man with the pan had poured a huge spoonful of lentils onto the bread. They were surrounded by a pack of hungry hounds who whined abjectly for the food as they crowded panic-stricken round the dispenser of charity. Munnu almost dropped his food in his effort to get away from the crowd, but he scraped through by exercising a queer strength which the mere sight of food seemed to put into him. He crossed the courtyard to the edge of a fountain playing before the summer house of a garden. From the garden came a mixed aroma of fresh chameli, champak and mulsari flowers. He sat down and began to eat. He was absorbed in himself for a moment, relishing the taste of the lentils, crudely cooked as they were. But when the gnawing hunger in his belly was half satisfied, he looked around.